Hi, I'm John Auerbacher, and I co-lead the White Plains, New York International Myeloma Foundation Patient Support Group along with Jeff O'Donnell. I am here at ASH 2016 for my second year. I was at the 2015 ASH in Orlando. This year I feel a lot more confident, and I am taking more in and trying to see how it will apply to the members in our group and in other groups around the country. We're here with about 13 or 14 group leaders from around the United States. What is astonishing is the depth and intricacy of the scientific research. If ever we worried that people aren't interested in, people being the researchers, in multiple myeloma, this would definitely prove us wrong. There are literally hundreds of research projects going on in areas that I've never even heard of. For example, this morning, one of the great researchers from Spain, Bruno Paiva, was talking about just pulling out some circulating multiple myeloma cells so that us as patients would not have to undergo as many bone marrow biopsies. And that's a very exciting development, and they're working to see whether if they did that, the same results as they've been getting from the bone marrow biopsies could be obtained. So that's a really interesting patient applicable piece of research. There's other research that is a little more remote from what we can perhaps even understand or take away and apply to our particular situation. So the temptation for a patient is always, how is this research going to affect me? Can I look at the statistics and say, I'm up there on the board somewhere and that's the medicine I should take? That's kind of an impossible task for a patient, even if you're a medical professional as a patient. And we do have several medical professionals among our leadership group. We have at least 2 physicians and 1 PhD nurse and another nurse practitioner from the Mayo Clinic. But still, what's wonderful is that we will rely on our multiple myeloma specialists to make their best recommendation. And that's why we always encourage everybody to see a multiple myeloma specialist. One of the questions which has occurred to me is, well, how do you know if they're a multiple myeloma specialist? One way is to call the IMF hotline, the info line, I think we're calling it, and give them the name or tell them where you live. And they will tell you something if they know the particular physician, or they'll perhaps check in with Dr. Dury. It's interesting, there was a presentation Friday. Dr. Dury created some case studies. Here's a hypothetical patient. Here's the symptoms they're showing, and here are the test results. And then asked the physicians, how should we treat? So one of the interesting results also was that he asked, how many of you see less than 5 to 10, 10 to 20 patients at any one time? And I got the impression that if a physician is not seeing, let's say, 25 myeloma patients at one time, they're going to have a lot of trouble keeping up with the voluminous amount of information that is coming out. So perhaps one way to gauge whether you're seeing a specialist is really simply to ask, how many multiple myeloma patients are you seeing at any one time? Clearly, if you're going to a major medical institution, they will have a group or a center that's labeled Multiple Myeloma Institute. That's a little more difficult if you're not living near one of those and don't have access. But it is important to determine and not just say, oh, I'm seeing a hematology oncology specialist. I'm seeing a real multiple myeloma specialist. So, one thing that comes out of this is there are ways to determine whether the particular physician is, a specialist, meaning they really are interested in and treat a lot of patients. What was also interesting about the case studies presented by Dr. Dury is when he asked, how many would treat with, A, how many would treat with B, how many would treat with C, wide variety of responses. So that's a little bit scary for patients, You'd think everybody should be kind of on board, maybe 80% will agree, but there were really some answers from the physicians in the audience that indicated that, they're here to learn more because they got some of the answers incorrect. And there is disputes about which way to go, but as presented by several of the physicians from the Mayo Clinic, there are some pretty standard protocols that can be used. And as a patient, once you get calmed down after diagnosis, you can discover those by speaking to the IMF on their info line or one of the group support leaders. Let's see, what other particular abstracts? So they have an oral presentation. What that means is that it's a 15-minute presentation of research that's not quite ready for prime time. It's not going to be published yet. So usually they're about an hour and a half long, and you get about 6 of the oral presentations. They move rapid fire, and there are always a few questions that are answered at the end. There are true presentations where an abstract has been selected by the ASH officials, and those are longer, let's say 35 minutes. Those are really complete research that is put out in the field and I believe accepted as a step in understanding myeloma. And then there are some very difficult to understand scientific sessions where the biology of myeloma is discussed, and very beautiful but totally incomprehensible charts are presented with lots of statistics. But it's great for us group leaders to sort of listen a little bit to that, and then we can decide, was there anything from that somebody wants to know. The other great thing is just meeting with all of the support group leaders. So like I learned this year that this particular physician is a specialist in amyloidosis, and occasionally there'll be a group member that really needs to see a specialist, or this is the physician who really specializes in POEMS, which is an unusual sort of side disease associated with multiple myeloma. So that is what, among other things, we are learning here. And right now I'm in the exhibition hall, and what that is let's say, I don't know, there must be 50 pharmaceutical companies here. They have booths, and they have both sales representatives and scientists there. And so you can go up and say to them, hey, I'm thinking of going on Ninlaro, and I had a few questions. Since this is a ASH convention, it's not just myeloma, however.
In 5 minutes. Product Theater 1. A presentation sponsored by Janssen Biotech is located in the back of the 3700 aisle. Product Theater 2, a presentation sponsored by Shire, is in the back of the 2300 aisle. Product Theater 3, a presentation sponsored by AbbVie, is in the front of the 1600 aisle.
We going to speak some more? So I think we also should pay close attention to the fact that it's not just institutions in the United States that are leading the way in understanding myeloma. We've seen a lot of researchers, I would say particularly from Spain and France, that have been presenting this weekend, and they're just robust institutions and many researchers that have really contributed a great deal, not to mention Germany and Greece and a few other European countries. There was a Finnish presenter this morning, so it's all incredibly exciting to see the cooperation among facilities around the world. And starting to see as well, I think there's an award going to a researcher from Shanghai. This is just really hopeful for us as myeloma patients.